if you've ever been disappointed in how a show you like ended and you're still butthurt about it even though it's been 10 or more years, go ahead and click that subscribe button. What is up? It is devout patriot and author Nathaniel Shimkovitz here, again to give you a little bit more of my insights into storytelling, writers, genres, anything I feel like really talking about. There's no kind of rhyme or reason to how I do this. So if you're liking this style of content, go ahead, give me a like. Go ahead, share it with your friends. Go ahead, drop me a comment. Tell me how I suck or how I'm not doing too well or you're wrong about this. I'd be more than happy to refute you in the comments, answer any questions you have. But in the meantime, just to stay up on everything, go ahead, subscribe. Again, hit that bell so you can stay up on all my uploads, especially for the launch of the Shroud of Peace audio series coming out on Tuesday right here on YouTube, Soundcloud, and Patreon. Okay. So tonight, I decided that I didn't feel like talking about one specific individual. It's mostly going to be about them, but it's going to be about kind of their whole company because he hasn't been really involved in it. Because this man is kind of like that one villain on the Jimmy Neutron show, the one about the kid with a comically oversized head that probably weighs as much as his body. I'm surprised his neck didn't snap in half like a toothpick. But that one villain that could never finish his sentences, let alone his own schemes for whatever the reason, even though he's apparently an engineering genius. But yeah, so tonight we're going to talk about Bad Robot and its head honcho, JJ Abrams. So a little bit of history with these guys. I picked up JJ Abrams' work around the time I was like 16, I think, or 16, somewhere between 16 and 18 was the first time I ever watched a JJ Abrams movie. It was a 2009 Star Trek movie, and it blew my mind. That's really what kind of got me into writing more science fiction and opened my horizons more to that genre outside of Star Wars and Back to the Future and the like. So that was kind of a revelation to me, and it got me to dig more and more into the filmography of JJ Abrams, where I watched all of the major shows he did: Lost, Fringe, Person of Interest to a lesser extent. Basically, if you ever turned on television in the last 10 years, you've probably seen a show that had JJ Abrams' name plastered on it somewhere. And likewise with movies, I've watched quite a few of his movies, not quite as religiously as someone like Christopher Nolan, who I might actually do a whole video on him at some point, but basically, I've kept up on JJ Abrams' work. And right up until about the time The Force Awakens came out, I was convinced that this man could do no wrong. And then I watched that movie. No, I actually did think that movie was all right. Really, it was kind of around the time of Rise of Skywalker, or really The Last Jedi was when I began to question his competency. This video is not going to be all about Star Wars, though. This is about Bad Robot and JJ Abrams' story writing philosophy. So before I utterly destroy JJ Abrams and his entire method of writing and his whole approach to storytelling, let's talk about some of the stuff that he and his company do that I like. So the good. I've obviously watched all of his stuff, and I didn't do it to torture myself. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. The good stuff that he does with this is that it's very engaging. JJ Abrams is really good at writing a hook. Is really good at writing a hook for a show or creating a hook for a show, and I'll get more into that as I explain his writing style and his storytelling philosophy. One of the things about it that makes it so engaging is just when you get into the community for JJ Abrams shows, there's a lot of audience participation, a lot of fan theories, even borderline fan fiction about all of the work he's attached to. So back before he started becoming more of a household name, if you said fan theory, you were basically writing your show's death warrant. Whereas the work of JJ Abrams and Bad Robot seemed to thrive off of this. I remember, in the months before Rise of Skywalker came out, everyone's fan theories were going nuts about Star Wars. You couldn't go for 2 seconds on the internet without seeing some fan theory about Star Wars that ended up being hilariously wrong after that movie came out, but that's beside the point. It just means that people are very interested in this work. Another thing is, I think that overall, JJ Abrams is a good director. There's a lot of controversy about his use of lens flare and stuff like that, but it seems like he's toned that down quite a bit. I don't really remember any big ones in The Rise of Skywalker. At least it made sense when he did it, so whatever. Anyway, Though, the other thing is he's a good director. He can do cinematography fairly competently. His edits are pretty well executed overall. There's some disjointed editing here and there, but nothing too dramatic. And he has a real flair for coordinating action scenes. Always very engaging, very energetic, very stuff like that. JJ is a very energetic director, and I like that. So, another thing he's got going for him is that he always has really good casts. He always knows how to get the best out of actors, and the chemistry between them is always really good. And the character writing, while maybe a little Joss Whedon-y, a little Marvel dialogue quippiness here and there, it's not so horribly bad or offensive. It's not like Rian Johnson level cringe in The Last Jedi or Joss Whedon level stuff before. But he has really good casting overall. Like going back to the Star Trek movies he directed, the crew of the Enterprise in the Kelvin timeline are really entertaining to watch all together. All those characters are a drastic departure from their source material counterparts, but overall, that cast just has really good synergy. It's really entertaining to watch all of them on screen. Anton Yelchin, rest in peace. So, anyway, though, let's get to the part that you all came here for. Let's get to the part where I tell you about why JJ Abrams is so terrible when it comes to storytelling. Now, back around, God, it was 12 years ago, JJ Abrams did a TED Talk where he talked about his perspectives on storytelling. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put a link to it in the description so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. JJ likens his entire approach to storytelling around something called the mystery box. He equates it to this toy that he had when he was a kid, or he bought as a kid in a magic shop, and it's just this box where something crazy like, oh, $50 worth of magic in a $10 package or something like that. I haven't obviously watched the video in a second, but basically he likens it to this, and he never opened it, and always intrigued him what was inside of it. And he goes on after that to explain the plots of other various movies, such as Star Wars, because we all know he's a massive nerd over that thing. And it comes down to pretty much how he puts all of this intrigue into the devices that drive the plot. This is a little bit more similar to something that we've all heard of called a MacGuffin. If you've never heard of a MacGuffin before, it's basically the thing that drives the plot. It's this like serious Maltese Falcon, Ark of the Covenant vibe sort of thing, where it's just this device that drives the plot and everybody wants it. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's essentially the thing that fuels the plot. My favorite interpretation of this comes down to Alfred Hitchcock, where he basically says that it doesn't matter what a MacGuffin is. It matters more that his characters want it. And in fact, it's such a good little speech he did at this lecture he did at Columbia University in New York in 1939, before the dark times of this quarantine and whatnot. And where, in fact, it's so good that I'm actually going to go ahead and read it. Apologies for my atrocious Hitchcock impression. It might be a Scottish name, taken from a story about two men on a train. One man says, "What's that package up there in baggage rack?" And the other one answers, "Oh, that's a MacGuffin." The first one asks, "What's a MacGuffin?" "Well," the other man says, "it's an apparatus for trapping lions in the Scottish Highlands." The first man says, "But there are no lions in the Scottish Highlands." And the other one answers, "Well then, that's no MacGuffin." So you see that a MacGuffin is actually nothing at all. So to reemphasize what Hitchcock is saying here is that it doesn't matter what the MacGuffin is. It doesn't matter what the device driving the plot is. What really matters is that the characters want it. And this opinion is so popular to the point where at the end of his first film, JJ Abrams basically uses this exact speech, or he paraphrases this exact speech. At the end of Mission Impossible 3, Tom Cruise, no, I don't use his character name because whatever the name of his character is in Mission Impossible, that's just basically normal Tom Cruise, asks Lawrence Fishburne's character what the rabbit's foot, what the thing he was chasing for the entire movie was. And Lawrence Fishburne, in so many words, says, "Doesn't matter." Whatever. So, That's how you're supposed to treat a MacGuffin in the movies. JJ Abrams, on the other hand, put so much intrigue into these MacGuffins. MacGuffins like the red matter in Star Trek, the freaking torpedoes in Into Darkness, that freaking donkey wheel in Lost, the machine in Person of Interest, like you name it. He puts so much intrigue into these MacGuffins and these things that drive the plot that it takes emphasis off of the characters, which is a real shame because some of the characters he has are actually pretty strong. Characters overall. Like Finch and John Reese and Person of Interest, they're a pretty good characterization, pretty good duo. But as that show progressed, the Machine and Samaritan took more priority over the relationship between these two characters and all the other characters in the cast. So another flaw with the mystery box style of writing is that when you start having all of these question marks pop up throughout the whole story, it starts to bog down the coherence of what's going on. It's why a lot of people complain about Lost. Now, I know JJ Abrams was not involved in Lost beyond the early few episodes of the first season. I know. But overall, he had his name plastered to that. He had his production company's name plastered to that overall. And it was generally his kind of writing philosophy that led Lost to be written and created the way that it was. And just because so many questions started cropping up throughout, the kind of narrative coherence of what that show was even about started to get lost. The Rise of Skywalker is another perfect example of this, to where you have so many questions and so many plot threads come up throughout this that you never really get a sense of what that movie is actually about overall, or rather when you do figure out what it's about, it's kind of anticlimactic. So it de-emphasizes, and again going back to emphasis, all these questions detract even more from the spirit of the actual story and the characters and stuff like that. So another thing that I have with it is, again, going back to the original inspiration for the mystery box, this toy from a magic store that he bought. Watching a JJ Abrams movie, this is more so a movie, more to his more recent work, is like watching a magic trick, where you watch a magician on stage and they're doing all this crazy stuff, like nothing up my sleeves. There's no magic trick to be done in this video. I'm not that talented, I'm afraid. So he's doing all this stuff, and you expect at the end he's going to pull like a rabbit out of his hat or something like that. But at the end of a lot of these movies, sometimes the ending you get is just, or if you ever watched a Patrick H. Willems movie, which I'll probably also put a link to that in the description too, where he talks about JJ Abrams' first work, a show called Felicity, or at least one that he saw all the way through. And the way that show ended was that all the characters essentially ended up in the same place they were at the beginning of the show, just a little bit wiser. And that's what I've noticed a lot with with a lot of JJ Abrams' work. Star Trek Into Darkness, essentially, they go through that whole adventure, but the crew of the Enterprise is utterly unaffected, and they're just back to the same place they were at the end of the first movie. And Rise of Skywalker is another perfect example of this, where basically he just resets the whole continuity to go back to essentially one of the more iconic shots in A New Hope. The characters just end there. You get all of this pizzazz, all of this spectacle, all of this intrigue, all of these questions, all of these plot twists to add up to a very underwhelming conclusion overall. It's just all this fluff and spectacle, but no substance to it whatsoever. So I've heard a lot of criticisms of this magic trick style. I've heard it called I've heard it called set up, no payoff. Critical Drinker says rapid fire stupidity for this, and I agree with that. But I put it like this. Writing a story is much like writing a joke. Every joke requires setup, and it requires a payoff. In the case of JJ Abrams, going back to the Jimmy Neutron comparison I made at the beginning of the movie, he does all of this work to set up, but he never goes out with an intent or plan for payoff. And when he's forced to come up with a payoff, like he did most recently with Rise of Skywalker, it was lackluster at best and felt kind of joyless overall. But really, that's kind of my opinion. The mystery box storytelling method is just basically a giant distraction to get you through, and then suddenly you look down at your watch and you've wasted 2 hours of your life. That's how I see the mystery box. It builds up a lot of intrigue, but there's never any payoff to that intrigue to where you can build it up. You can build up questions and stuff, but eventually you must have an answer. Otherwise, you just have a mess that's just really a time sink at the end of the day. But that's really just my opinion. What do you think? Go ahead, leave your thoughts in the comments. If you're a huge fan of JJ Abrams, you want to send me some hate, go ahead, feel free to do that. I'd be more than happy to engage with you in the comments. If you disagree with me or think I did something wrong, go ahead and correct me in the comments. But that's really all I have for you. Just keep using your time wisely during these absurd quarantine times. Stay safe, stay sane. Good night.